Hi, I'm Adrian Martin, and I'll be taking you through this film from 20th Century Fox 1948. A film with the wonderfully vague, broad and generic title of Cry of the City, a title that could fit many crime films, film noir movies as we now call them, from this period. Not only is the title rather non-specific, so is the music, because Alfred Newman's theme, Street Scene, that we're hearing was in fact used in many 20th Century Fox films. Cry of the City is directed by Robert Siodmak. I think this is one of his underrated films, and I think Siodmak is certainly not an unknown figure. He's celebrated by many film fans and film critics, but he's not the kind of director who's ever quite got the acclaim that I think he deserves. That's because I think he changed his style for each new project that he worked on. Now, Cry of the City is a film which is full of indirection, of sort of indirect moves, strange places where the story goes. Speaking of place, literally, what is this place? It maybe seems like a church at the start. And we have a strong dose of what will become very important in the film, ethnic detail, in this case, Italian-American culture. So we've had a place which is in fact a hospital, and we've had this indirect introduction to our two lawful characters, our two cops, Candela, played by Victor Mature, and his sidekick Jim, played by Fred Clark. It's very important, I think, in this movie that we don't begin with the cops and we don't come into the scene to be introduced to Martin Rome, Marty as he will be referred to often in the film. However, we've just got the detail then that fills you in on the criminal activities of Marty and of the fact that he has shot a cop. Now, there's absolutely no ambiguity about this in the film. He shot a cop, he says so, everybody knows it. So the film is not a mystery about that point. Now we've got another indirect move in this film immediately. The girlfriend of Martin Rome, played by someone who would go on to become a starlet with a quite unusual career, Deborah Paget. She was famous 10 years later for her roles in Fritz Lang's Indian set movies. Now, once again, this bit of a hospital is looking more and more like a church again. Strong emphasis on religious, on Christian iconography, the crucifix and so on. Now, Martin Rome, played by Richard Conte. Very intriguing character. The first intriguing thing about him in the film is that really, from the word go, he's dying. Like, we're introduced to him as a dying man, and pretty much he'll stay that way until the end of the film. If that makes you think, for instance, of Jim Jarmusch's film Dead Man, I think that's a very good comparison. There's a whole lot of films, particularly in more contemporary times, which sort of trace the slow dying of a character. And that's something that Billy Wilder used in a number of his films, such as Double Indemnity, which was maybe an influence on this movie that we're watching now. So, in this scene between the Deborah Paget character, Tina, and Marty, we get what seems to be a very authentic picture of love. And this is important in Martin Rome's character, that even though he's a cop killer, he is really genuinely in love with this woman, Tina. And as you'll see, he does an awful lot to protect her in the course of the film, to keep her anonymous. Now, there are a lot of ellipses, little gaps, little jumps in the story in this film. And this is something that Siodmak and his writers, I'll come back to the writers later, this is something they really worked on in an ingenious way, because both the introduction and the exit of Tina in that scene, were elided. she's gone. In fact, she'll be gone for most of the movie. Now we have the introduction of a new character, and what a fascinating character he is. W.A. Niles, a lawyer, or a rather shady lawyer, played by Barry Kroger. Now, this guy has got every scam in the world going. He works for another character who's often referred to in this story, Leggett. Leggett will never be seen in the film, even though he's mentioned a lot. This is Leggett's lawyer. There's actually a bit more to it than that, but this is how we're introduced to the character of Niles. And basically, he's trying to sort of win the innocence of his criminal client by shifting the blame or the association for another crime onto the dying Martin Rome. This is a fascinatingly sort of labyrinthine plot, much of which is off-screen, which is not directly told in the film. But you have to keep up with these moves in the film. Okay, so now Niles is going to try his game. He's going to try to get Martin to confess to an association with a crime that in fact he has absolutely nothing to do with. Let's have a look now, right now in this shot, at some aspects of Robert Siodmak's visual style, certainly as it expresses itself in this film. He loves what are called master shots. He does as much of the scene as he can within one sort of wide frame, a wide shot, in which there are many levels: foreground, midground, background. And you'll see in this shot, for instance, how he loves these kinds of diagonal placements of heads, how he loves the depth of frame. And he often tends to do a scene very economically with just a few insert close-ups, such as the close-up of Martin and the close-up of Victor Mature as Candela that we've just seen. And everything else is playing out in this one master shot, like all of this action of the stretcher being taken away, the dialogue playing between the three men in the foreground. We're going to see many variations on this kind of thing, which is in fact almost Siodmak's stylistic signature. Although, as I said at the start, he's not a director we know for having a completely recognisable style. Now, in this film, Siodmak was on loan out from his usual studio that hired him, Universal, and he was working in a sort of a new variation of the urban crime film, and that's one that used real locations, right? So these real New York streets and other locations in the film. And the advertising, the trailer for the film makes a big deal of this, shot in the actual places. Siodmak, who in fact preferred a more stylised setting, wasn't completely happy with location shooting, but as you'll see, he adapted himself to it very well. Now, something very important just happened then. We were introduced in a particular shot, in a particular sort of subtle way, to the character of the nurse, Miss Pruitt, played by Betty Gard. She's going to have a very important role in this film. As you can see, she's hard as nails. She's not, in any Hollywood sense, a young conventional beauty. But here's a strange moment, right, where Candela warns her against Marty's seductive ways and his ways with women, and she says, why the hell should I worry about that? In fact, she should worry about it, because Marty Rome is a little bit like the figure in a later crime gangster film, The Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond by Bud Boetticher, in that he's a guy who works by charm and by seduction, and particularly by the seduction of women. And this is not an especially sleazy or sexy thing in the film. It has to do simply a lot to do with his personality, with his character, and the fact that he can get women to help him. And as you'll see, there's like a parade of women across the film who help him. Now, we start to get into Martin Rome here, although you may still be wondering, if you see this film for the first time, at this point you're wondering, what exactly is the plot of this movie? We have a guy who's dying, we have references to another plot altogether, the plot of Leggett and jewel theft, and someone who has been tortured, an old lady who has been tortured for her jewels, and we're wondering, where exactly is the plot of this film? Where is the centre or the motor of the plot? Now, I think this kind of indirection, this sort of labyrinthine path, is very characteristic of the movie and very characteristic of what makes it, in fact, so interesting. Now, one thing we're being introduced to in this scene is the very clever ways of Marty Rome, as in he can smooth talk his way out of almost anything, and he's also very good at playing. You know, he can play unconscious when he needs to, he can play amnesiac when he needs to. And basically, he's not giving anything away to anyone. Now look here, this is once again a very typical kind of Siodmak setup where we've got the two guys in the foreground and Miss Pruitt just a little bit in the background. But there are many subtle ways in which Siodmak underlines the importance of this female character in the film. Siodmak very much uses a Fritz Lang style technique, the kind of technique that Fritz Lang used in his American films, which is often it's just the small reframings of the scene, the small moves of the camera, the positioning of the actors, where a scene begins, like which character does a scene begin on and which character does a scene end on. These small but very telling emphases are what really sculpt the director's bringing to life his interpretation of the screenplay. And this is a film where, you know, when you look at it from this viewpoint of, you know, what did Siodmak bring to this film, or what did he bring out of this film in terms of the script material, you can see how brilliantly and intricately he worked on things. In this scene, in this part of the scene, because this is quite a long sequence set in the hospital, we're getting Marty working on Miss Pruitt. He's going to convince her to help him. And partly it's because of this total genuineness that Marty wants to protect his girl, Tina. And he wants to get a message to her. He wants, in fact, Miss Pruitt to look after her, like to take care of her. Something, of course, that at first Pruitt says, you know, once again, are you kidding me? You know, of course I'm not going to help you. But in fact, she very quickly makes a decision to do so. Now, how do you make a decision in a movie? You're about to see that. He's pleading, please take this piece of paper, and then suddenly somebody comes back into the room. It's Niles. And at that moment of decision, Pruitt takes the piece of paper and hides it. Okay, so it's like the action of the scene forces a decision. It's a very wonderful cinematic and dramatic technique. It's not as if the character of Pruitt needs to go away and think about it for a while. No, it's an action that forces a decision. So we're still in this very long sequence of the hospital, and now we have the somewhat sinister figure of Niles back again. Now, in this part of the scene, the mise en scène, meaning the ways of staging, the positioning of the actors, the use of the lighting on the actors, and of course the camera angle and the moving camera, these things sort of go up a notch here in terms of intensity and temperature. And look at this. This is fantastic. Niles walks around. He starts moving around Marty in the bed. And this is a fascinating thing because we're very used to seeing in films a sort of a choreographic dance of, for instance, two characters moving around each other, as if in some sort of combat, whether it's psychological or physical. Of course, now we have one character who's completely flat on his back, Marty, and we have the lawyer playing a power game, which is the power game of he is able to move around to the back of the bed head, and therefore Marty, as you see in this shot, he has to strain, he has to strain his neck, his body to see Niles, to speak to him. And Niles, of course, can take this game further, which is exactly what he's going to do. Now, here you see the master shot brilliance of Siodmak's work, right? Because all of this is getting played out basically in one shot. He's not the kind of director that makes you think, oh, wow, that was a 3-minute take or a 5-minute take, mainly because everything is so fluid and because everything is moving forward and the dialogue is flowing forth and the plot is moving on. There's never anything static about Siodmak's films. Now look at this, the camera moves in a little bit. That's one of those Langian style reframings. And we have this moment of very uncomfortable intensity or intimacy, proximity between these two men, as Niles is putting the hard word on Marty. Now we're getting ready for the really intense part of this scene, and here it is. And there was a cut to set up a new positioning, a new aspect of the mise-en-scène. So now Niles is right around the back of the bed, and look at this, it's just fantastic. Marty can't see him. He's in a way, and look at that wonderful point of view type of shot that expresses the dominance, the domination of Niles over Marty in this scene. It's a rather scary shot. And then, right, the only way that Marty can fight back is to grab him very uncomfortably, and of course it sends Marty himself sort of crashing out of the bed, which is what happens now, right? So he's completely exhausted himself in that action, sort of made himself unconscious again. And now Siodmak's back to a wider angle and position. But look at this. This is where the scene pretty much ends, is with Proie, right? It ends right there in her look, in her action. But that shot placed at the end of the scene is enough to tell you that in a way she has committed herself to helping Marty. Now, I mentioned earlier that this film has a lot of Italian-American cultural detail. That was also part of the as it were, the project of this film. It was part of a small movement, a small subgenre of films, in which we had this kind of social, cultural detail. And the writer of the film, Richard Murphy, one of the writers on the film, because there was also input uncredited from the very great writer Ben Hecht. We'll come back to him. Now, Richard Murphy, who also wrote the Elia Kazan film Boomerang around this same period, he was someone who specialised in this kind of more socially conscious kind of urban film with a little bit of a political consciousness. And he was awarded for this. He was recognised as someone who was bringing this kind of social theme into Hollywood movies. In this part of the film, this strange scene, it seems like the father is being sort of excused from his membership or his leadership of an Italian-American association, because of course his son is a cop-killing criminal. Now, very important place, the set. There are 2 doors to this apartment, right? And that's just been set up there, right? That Candela went to one door, and then the other door opened, and he's called in there. It's very important that the film sets that up, that there are two doors in this apartment and the layout of the apartment, because that's going to become very important later, and it's going to become very important that we have taken that in, that we've processed, even if only half consciously, the physical layout with the two doors of this apartment. Here's another odd little scene here, which is also part of the, as it were, the cultural fabric of the movie, where Candela has a little byplay with a small boy, with a child. And I think part of the reason for this scene is to sort of establish some kind of sympathy for Candela. This is necessary in the film because Candela, as every commentator on this film has mentioned, Candela is a rather driven and obsessed character. And his motivations seem to go a fair way beyond his strict role as a cop or as an investigator. There's all kinds of strange and dark sides, or at least hints of a dark side to this character. Some questionable aspects to him, which is the kind of thing that certainly in Siodmak's films, such as Dark Mirror, The Killers, Crisscross, there's other films he made in the 40s in Hollywood. This is something that Siodmak loves, is this possibly reversible, exchangeable relationship between the hero and the villain, between the two main characters on two sides of the law, who in some sense are mirrors of each other, shadows of each other, doubles of each other. This is particularly true, of course, in that Candela here has an extraordinarily close relationship, it seems, to this family, to the Rome family. He calls the mother Mama throughout the movie, and we learn in the course of the movie that Candela grew up in the same neighbourhood as Martin Rome. He may have known him as a child. I don't think they quite grew up together as best friends, but they have shared this particular slice of Italian-American culture. But there's two sides, of course, to Candela's fondness for this family, because, of course, he's always plumbing for information. And the information, of course, that's driving him nuts here is that he wants to know who was that mystery girl who appeared and disappeared at the hospital. Now, the father of this family doesn't have a particularly prominent role. That's partly because he's not at all charmed by the machinations of his son, whom he's very ashamed. But the theme of fatherhood is important in the film, and it's also important in a sense that Candela is going to displace the actual biological father. This is because of this new character that we've been introduced to, Tony Rome, and this is the younger brother of Marty, played by Tommy Cook. Now, we only get a brief introduction to Tony here. He's a young punk. He looks up to his brother. And a lot of this film, in a way, its more conventional social issue side is going to be about turning this kid away from the path of criminal delinquency and across to the side of good behaviour and the law. There are other kinds of undertones and undercurrents in the film that we'll keep mentioning as they come up. Okay, at this point of the film, Mama has given some soup to Candela, and he's going to bring it to Marty Rome in what is now a prison hospital. As we hear, it's not really much of a prison, and it's kind of easy to break out of. Now, here we have, in a very typical Siodmak master shot, an interplay of three characters. We have two new characters. Once again, we have Orvie, who's the guy cleaning in the background, played by Walter Baldwin, and we have his superior, a guy that he does not like one bit in the film. And a lot of what Orvie will do is is a kind of a revenge thing against this other guy. Okay, now this is a fascinating little part of the film. It's almost a Hitchcockian part of the film because it concerns in a roughly 10-minute sequence the path of Martin Rome's escape from this prison hospital. Now, I ask you to particularly pay attention here to the very fine work around this character of Orvie. Robert Siodmak was well known and well celebrated in his lifetime for his work with actors. Actors really liked him, and he worked very closely with them, and he worked closely with even the smallest role in the film. This is one of the things that makes his films so rich. So we have this character of Orvie who is very vividly created in all of his gestures, in, as I say, his motivations, his own little story that he has going of revenge, and in all of the mannerisms and vocal effects. Everything around this character is very vivid and fascinating. It's clear that, Siodmak wanted to give every actor the chance to do everything that they could do. Now look at this wonderful bit of what's going to be part of this long suspense sequence where we have the dropping of the magical spoon, which is going to unlock the jail door as Candela approaches. So here we have this object that strangely it kind of unites the two men, which is the mama's soup, which another beautiful gesture in the film, which Marty kisses. Okay, I want to mention that the novel that this film is based on, which has a different title, it's called The Chair for Martin Rome. So he is much more obviously explicitly designated as the main character of the story. And that was written by a guy named Henry Edward Helseth. Now, Henry Edward Helseth is not terribly well known today. He didn't have a very prolific career as a writer. And in fact, he's become better known in the annals of French literature simply because this book, The Chair for Martin Rome, was translated in a very famous series of crime novels published in France. In 1950, it was translated and published. And it was a big hit there, and indeed a huge fan of the book was the celebrated filmmaker Jean-Pierre Melville, who described it as the highest level of literature and a masterpiece. And it's funny that there is a French Wikipedia page for Helseth, and there's no English Wikipedia page for him. Now, in terms of the adaptation of Helseth's novel, I mentioned earlier that Ben Hecht worked in an uncredited fashion on this film. One of the things that you can see, the Hecht touch, the Hecht contribution, is that the film has a very unusual structure. It's not at all a clear 3-act or 4-part, sort of neat, tidy kind of structure. It does sort of fall into 4 parts, but we're still in part 1. And that has to do with the fact that there have been all these sort of indirect ways into the plot of Martin Rome in a way. And also there's been the introduction of quite a lot of characters and a very slow or gradual introduction of new characters. And in fact, this is something that is going to continue even further into the film, that there's going to be new characters emerge quite late into the movie. Anyway, so because of this unusual structuring, this is the kind of thing that Ben Hecht himself, I think, was a pioneer of. If we look at a movie like Hitchcock's Notorious, for instance, around this period, 1946, we'll see that Hecht was experimenting with having scenes of very uneven length, like quite short scenes and then quite long sequences, and with sort of discombobulating a little bit these very even sort of theatrical rhythms and structures that Hollywood had been using previously in its screenplay writing. So I think in Hecht, you start to get the beginnings, very very strong and vivid beginnings of a more modern form of script writing. And then later directors such as Nicholas Ray, Samuel Fuller, Anthony Mann and others will kind of embrace these more uneven, these more irregular narrative structures. And they'll also play with things like indirection and ellipsis. But Robert Siodmak, already in 1948, is proving himself quite a master of these unusual techniques that in the time that the film was released and for quite some time later, commentators on the film, for instance, the writers Board and Chaumeton, who wrote a famous book on the American film noir, and they were the first to do it. They wrote a book in French in the 1950s, and they were very admiring of Siodmak's work, but they referred to this film as an uneven film. That's their word, uneven. And I think that impression they had that this film was uneven had to do with its unusual mix of stylistic tones, that there is a certain realism or a certain Hollywood realism in the location filming, in the socio-cultural, sociological detail of the Italian-American family and culture and so on. And then there is something that we recognise more as film noir, and that is to say there's an expressionistic, very stylised aspect. There's also, as becomes clearer and clearer in the film, this strange element of violence. This, in fact, was very much to Board and Chaumeton's taste. It sort of fitted in with their very surrealist taste of what was dreamlike and strange and perverse in the film noir. But there's also, as well as all of those things I've just mentioned, there's also a melodrama element, particularly in relation to the family story, the story of fathers, mothers, sons, and symbolic fathers and sons, because Candela, in a way, becomes part of the Rome family in a symbolic sense. We'll see this play out later in the film. And indeed, Siodmak's career, if you look across his career, which didn't begin in Hollywood, he was a German director, German Jewish, and he made a series of films in Germany, in France, before hitting America. And then after his Hollywood career, his American career, he went back to making European films. And particularly in Germany, he made some outstanding late works. He worked almost right up to the age of 70 as a director, and he died in 1973, at the age of 73, in fact. Okay, so we're still in this very tense scene of Martin Rome's escape. This is a beautifully judged, beautifully played out, beautifully paced sequence. It uses, once again, a recognisably Fritz Lang style technique, and that there are going to be various moments where Marty and we think that he's been caught, he's been found out in his ruse here, that Orvie has set up for him a fake pass, a fake identity, as he limps his way out of this prison hospital.
He was supposed to be out at 11. Name?
Tony Garino.
So we have these moments that are a bit like moments in Fritz Lang's Scarlet Street or Woman in the Window, some of Lang's films of the 1940s that I'm sure Siodmak was quite familiar with at the time, where we're about to see one of these moments soon. So here it is. So Martin Rome is called, and there's this moment of tension. Has he been found out? No, it's nothing like that. The guy's just giving him the bit of paper back and tells him, hand that in at the front. And now we're going to get another one of these excruciating delays, right? Because the whole point of this protracted sequence is to stretch out the tension of his movement of escape. And there has to be these delaying tactics. So now it's a question of the elevator here, of the lift. He gets into it, and once again, there's going to be another moment where it's like, hold that lift. Look at this beautiful master shot of Siodmak. Very characteristic once again, the action right from the foreground all the way to the background. This character here, of course, who could completely expose him in a moment if he caught a glimpse of Marty in the lift. So here's a scene that plays within the master shot and in a very economical sequence of shots on the question of visibility. Right? This is one of the things that Siodmak played with in his mise-en-scène, like who could see who. We saw that at play in the scene of Niles at the bedhead, like who has the power of vision, you know, who can see, who is blocked from seeing, and so on. This is one of the little games that Siodmak could play so masterfully in the way that he staged and set things up. Now here's another excruciating moment of pause, of delay, where this rather ominous-looking boxes, you think they're coffins for a second, and of course all of the hospital supplies, towels, beds, you know, this endless parade of things blocks his way. And finally he's still limping along here. A little touch of film noir lighting in the use of shadows. Although one must say that generally this film, is less expressionistic than some of Siodmak's other films of the 1940s, which I think is one of the reasons, sadly, that it has not been as highly regarded even among Siodmak fans. And in fact, there's a lot of play on daylight, and because that's part of the of this subgenre of the using real locations, using everyday locations. Okay, here's another, as it were, kind of indirect swerve in the film. We've left Martin Rowe, where we haven't followed where he has actually landed at. We've jumped back to Candela and his cronies, and they're making a calculated guess that he's probably at home, at the family home. So this is once again a very typical sort of Siodmak shot here. It could have been done by a bit of process work, where we have this deep focus image of the kid approaching. This is the brother, of course, Tony Rowe. And Candela disappears because he doesn't want to be recognised here. And now we're going to get another one of the many games, sort of evasion games in the film. The kid is no fool. He seems, as will become clear, he seems to have realised, it's in that look that he just gives there, seems to have realised that maybe he's being tailed and spied upon and listened to, eavesdropped on. So he starts talking in Italian. A wonderful sort of cultural detail here, because these all-American cops don't understand him. And they're completely helpless. They don't know what to do. Of course, they have to call in the cop who has a possibility of understanding this, which is Candela. Now, note this. Firstly, beautiful reveal there of Candela. Now, look at this. This rather gruesome detail of, taking the paper out of his mouth, and the kid complains, you're trying to kill me. Now, this sadistic detail is important in the film, because there will be other more sadistic details, and in a way, of course, we've already seen this touch of sadism, of an extreme physical violence or brutality in the scene between Niles and Rome back in the hospital bed. And this is one thing Siodmak, particularly in this film, was keen to work in, were these details, which, for a Hollywood film of 1948, are very strong. They're strong even for the film noir genre, which of course had a good deal of violence and sometimes going towards sort of perverse and sadistic forms of violence. Okay, at this part we realise that Marty has in fact gone to Niles's office, and here's a beautiful master shot sequence playing once again on visibility, that Niles doesn't at first see that Marty is there, and of course letting us know, because she's always in the background and because she figures in the dialogue, that the figure of the secretary is going to be very important in what is going to play out now. So, of course, this sequence between Rome and Niles is in some ways a sort of an answering scene, an inversion of the hospital scene where Niles was able to terrorise Marty. Now, of course, it's Marty who has all the balls in his court and is able to terrorise Niles. This is a beautifully directed scene. It's a scene where you can see the way Siodmak uses not only the master shot, but then, as it were, he concentrates the scene down to a two-shot, which allows shot-reverse shot cutting. He steps up the editing rhythm for certain very important dialogue exchanges. And the whole elasticity, the sort of plasticity of Siodmak's style is in the way he moves between these kinds of very choreographic arrangements in the master shot, and then when he needs to, he tightens up and if necessary, he'll get into a bit of montage, a bit of pretty fast editing between shot and counter shot or shot and reverse shot. This is a very supple, flexible style, which, if you're not paying much attention to it, can just seem like a normal classical Hollywood way of doing a scene. But in fact, it's very intricate and very particular in the way that Siodmak is obviously very carefully choosing what he wants to emphasise in a scene and what he wants to play down and what direction he wants to take a scene in. Okay, so the various aspects of menace, and that's a very important one, is the knife. The knife, which of course is so carefully positioned to reflect some glinting light there. The knife is going to be a very important prop in the film, very important object in the film. As the critic Michael Walker in the book, The Movie Book of Film Noir from 1992, Michael Walker writes a long and very good essay on Robert Siodmak's work, and he talks about this knife as something that circulates between the characters, the knife and the gun, these objects that serve to connect characters as they circulate through the film. And in particular, a kind of a trio, a male triangle of Candela, of Rome, and of Niles, which, as Walker argues, and I'll come back to this, Walker sees a homoerotic, a gay or queer suggestion, a hint, as it were, a subtext or a sub-theme of this in the film, which is not at all particularly on the surface of the film, but it is something that particularly Michael Walker himself is very persuasive in arguing is one of the undercurrents in this movie. And that's not so surprising for Robert Siodmak, because at least one of his other films, a very wonderful film called Christmas Holiday, made in 1944, is a film with an almost explicit gay intrigue in it, centred around Gene Kelly, of all people, playing in that film alongside Deanna Durbin, another strange unpredictable piece of casting in that superb film. Okay, now things are hotting up here. Now look at the way Siodmak departs from the point of view of Martin Rome here, right? He didn't see the detail of the gun in the drawer. This is something Siodmak plays with, this freedom, that he's never really sticking to one character's point of view. He'll often reveal an important detail that is outside the main character in this scene, Marty Rome, outside Marty Rome's point of view. And again right here, right? The secretary has returned. She's listening at the door, so we are aware of her presence. Now at this point of the film, almost halfway through it, another very important prop has arrived, and that's the jewels, the jewellery that is part of the Leggett case. Now, here's an extraordinary bit of action here. The secretary isn't dead. She presumably has just fainted from the fright of all of this going on. But in that flurry of action, of course, Rome has stuck the knife into Niles and killed him. Now, there's going to be another detail about this death which is particularly unsettling and uncanny, and it comes up in a moment. So now Martin Rome, of course, is even more than ever on the run. Here's the detail I'm talking about, right? He's fallen out of the chair, almost like a living dead moment, a kind of a zombie, like a very uncanny detail in the film. A detail which obviously Siodmak very lovingly staged and filmed. Okay, at this moment we're sort of settling a little bit into an alternating pattern here of scenes of Rome and scenes of Candela. Candela is of course chasing up every lead that he can, spying on the brother, trying to find the women in Martin Rome's life. In this alternation, of course, we're back now with Marty in the home. This is the beginning of another very long and very elaborate sequence in the film, set in the family apartment. And here's where, once again, we go through the details of the doors, of the length of the apartment, of this particular passageway. The father, of course, makes another brief appearance in the film, basically to say, get this guy out, and by the time I return, I want him out. So the father himself is sort of displaces himself from the main line of the drama. It's going to be, in every sense, sort of Candela, in a sense, who kind of takes the father's place, and also will also become a kind of an older brother, a big brother figure to the young kid, Tony Rome, in the course of the movie. So it's important that we get the real biological father kind of out of the scene there. Okay, now Mama Rome here is at last starting to see the light. Now, it's important that the mother is in the series of figures of women who have been, as it were, taken in, seduced in a loose sense of that word, by Marty Rome. Of course, as a mother, she loves him. She loves him above all her other children. There's all this kind of talk in the film. But this is the moment in the film where finally she's starting to see the light. Why do you have to kill? Is her plaintive, poignant question here to her son. And of course all he can truthfully answer is, well, sometimes you have to do it, to save yourself, to preserve yourself, you have to kill. This is not washing too well with Mama. Finally, she she's starting to think twice about her son. And that's expressed in that beautiful gesture that we just saw of the tearing there of the fabric. For her, for this character of the mother, a violent gesture. However, of course, Martin knows that he can always finally appeal to love, to his mother's love, and for his love, not only for her, but for his girlfriend. This is precisely what he uses on her, is the purity, the innocence of love in his life. This is one of the things that makes this character so fascinating, is that you do believe him, of course, that, there is this authentic, this genuine aspect of love which attaches itself to his character. Even though he's completely manipulative in so many ways in the film, and he uses everybody, this will become an important stated theme later in the film, that, like Leg's Diamond that I mentioned before in the film by Bud Boetticher, he uses people, he seduces people, and then he discards them, he throws them away. But at this point of the film, we're still, roughly in this midway part of the film, there's still an ambivalence around Martin's character, or there's two sides that there's some sympathy that we have for him, even as we're, of course, becoming more and more aware of his manipulative ways. Okay, here's an important scene between the two brothers. And a very clever bit of staging that puts the younger brother on literally the same level, the same height level, because he's sitting there on the bedhead. And we see, it's a very beautifully staged scene, this sort of easygoing intimacy, physical intimacy between the brothers. Okay, soup bowl, another ingeniously used prop in the film, because, as you'll see, Candela, whose shadow is approaching outside, Candela's going to notice this soup bowl, which has been placed there, of course, for Marty. Now, look at this. Okay, the mama, working out what to do, goes to the other door, right? This is the stuff that we had to notice earlier, that there are the two doors. So she goes to the other door and says, come this way, of course, to hopefully lead Candela away from her son. Unfortunately, she's no expert at these games, and Candela is much better at basically saying, I'm going to cross this space, I'm going to get right through this apartment, and I'm going to be looking everywhere. As you can see right now, he's looking everywhere at every possible moment for any trace of Marty. And the soup, of course, is in a sense the giveaway trace. And Mama's story about this soup is not terribly convincing. Plus, she's extremely nervous about the whole business. So here we have another scene of tension, of course, of once again based on the fact that Marty has to escape from somewhere. In fact, he spends most of his time in this film fleeing. In that sense, of course, he is a kind of a classic film noir hero or anti-hero, in that he's always on the run. We think of a much later film like King of New York by Abel Ferrara, where once again a similar figure of a haunted character, a character who's at a certain point is bleeding to death and who is always on the run, and of whom it is said, you can't run forever, a classic film noir type of a line. However, rather than run, Martin Rome decides to confront Candela in this scene. Now, this is a beautifully staged bit of stuff here. It's another kind of power game, but of a very unusual sort. Because, and this will also recur later in the film, Candela makes an educated guess that Marty will not shoot the gun inside his family home. He won't do that here. And so Candela plays a game with making a move. He puts a spoon on the table. He moves the bowl of soup. He drums his fingers on the table and he leans back nonchalantly as if to say, okay, I made a lot of moves there and you didn't shoot me.
So that's your hero, huh? Breaks out of jail.
And so this is a fascinating scene, this, because basically Marty is going to make another run for it, and Candela doesn't chase him immediately. Candela doesn't make a move here to arrest him. And this is maybe not completely logical. Of course, it's important, it's necessary for the film because there's still a lot of the film to play out. It can't end here, of course. And in fact, a very intriguing insertion is going to be made in the plot here, which is that rather than give chase to Marty Rome, Candela makes this decision to intervene in the life of this family. So here we have the brother Tony saying, look, you've upset Mama. And Candela says basically, okay, time for a talk. Time for you and me to talk. And so we have this beautiful moment here where the kid, frightened, intimidated, sits down and there's a fade out and a ellipse. So we don't get the talk, but we know that there's this important moment of Candela's insertion into the, as it were, the symbolic life of this family, of trying to bring some law and order, as it were, into this family, some morality into this family. Okay, another new character and a very familiar figure of Shelley Winters. So Shelley Winters is playing another one of the women in Martin Rome's life. Quite an ellipse here, right? Because in all this stuff that we haven't seen, Marty has given this character, played by Shelley Winters, a whole task, a whole mission to track down the mysterious Rose Givens. Now, Rose Givens will be a very important character in the rest of the film. We haven't seen her yet. And so here's a whole sequence to do with where we get this past of the Rose Givens character. She was once an entertainer, not much of an entertainer, a low-grade entertainer who couldn't really sing. And now she is a masseuse. She's into massage. And we'll kind of discover what that all means pretty soon. And we have this tantalising picture here in negative of Rose Givens. So this figure here, played by Shelley Winters, is another one of the women who is clearly in the power of Marty Rome. She'll do anything for the guy, and so of course she's one in a sort of historical line of presumably ex-girlfriends in the film. Ex-girlfriends who remain faithful to him to a rather remarkable extent. So here once again we can look at the very unusual narrative structure of this film. This film never goes in a very direct way from point A to point B or to its next point. What there is each time is a kind of a diversion which sort of brings its own interruptions and complications. Now, where the goal is, where they're trying to get to here, is Rose Givens. Marty wants to get to Rose. However, this passage from getting the address to arriving at the front door is going to be a quite complicated and drawn-out business. This is because Marty is falling into unconsciousness at a rapid rate, as you can see, He's bleeding away. He's dying effectively, slowly. And Shelley here has to do something about it. Now this is going to involve like a series of, as it were, digressions. And one of these involves getting a doctor on board. I mean, literally into the car, so that as the car is moving, the doctor, and this is Dr. Veroff, played by Constantine Shane. Constantine Shane was an actor who was known for his part in Orson Welles' film The Stranger of 1946. Later in his career, he had a very famous part in Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Now, Dr. Veroff is another one of these characters who sort of figures in Richard Murphy's particular way of writing society into a generic Hollywood script, because he's an immigrant. He's an immigrant doctor who, as we'll hear a bit more about this later, is not allowed formally, legally, to practice his profession of medicine in America. And we will see later on that he's part of a vast community of such doctors from all kinds of countries outside America who have landed in America and have hit hard times, thus pushing them into the underworld, some kind of illegal activity, in this case illegal surgery, literally, in this car. And so in this sequence here, we have the whole tension, the whole suspense of, the doctor needs a little bit of light to work. He needs her to stop the car, to pull in. Will they be seen by the cop trundling past on a horse? Right now, we're seeing one of these wonderful tight master shots of Siodmak, with the play of the three heads of the three people in a very constricted frame in a very tight space. So at this point, Shelley has to do another mission in order to help the doctor. So we have another diversion, another digression here, which is where she enters this bar. And this is going to create another complication. The complication is precisely this rather pesky guy, who we're about to see in a moment. This guy who, starts hitting on her in the bar. This guy here. And so he's going to start, trailing after her and so on. This is also important in the plot because later, when Candela's desperately trying to, in a sense, reconstruct this evening that we're watching, trying to reconstruct the movements of Martin Rome, and trying to get witnesses to whatever happened, he's going to pull in these various characters that we're seeing in this part of the film. Now, once again, this character of the doctor, Dr. Veroff, he's a poignant character. Once again, Siodmak obviously invested a lot in this brief, small role, and gave the actor quite a bit to express, because there's a desperation with this doctor, with this migrant character. He needs money, and it's clear that he doesn't want to be involved. He doesn't want to be associated with criminals, with gangsters, with anything like this. But he has to do this work. And look at this wonderful bit of byplay here. His fingers, give me the money. It's important that we notice that transaction of money, because that too will return in the plot. Just want to mention here, as this sequence is playing out, that in a very good book of the early 1970s, a book called Underworld USA by Colin MacArthur. And that was one of the early books that paid some attention to Robert Siodmak. And he speaks about this film, Cry of the City, and he makes a fairly conventional claim of that time, the 1960s, the 1970s, among film critics. He says that this film, Cry of the City, is full of interesting correspondences, echoes, connections we can draw between, particularly Candela and Martin Rome. And MacArthur says that they're not in the script, that it's purely a matter of the mise-en-scène of the direction. And I don't, in fact, think that's true. I think there's a very strong connection between the script and the direction, and that Siodmak really brought out what was potential, what was latent in the script. Now, we've just had one of the great introductions of cinema history, and here's Rose Given. And what an introduction, you know, the lights, 4 lights, the reflection in the floor, the multiple frames. It's once again a very Fritz Lang reminiscent kind of shot. And this absolutely extraordinary character of Rose, played by Hope Emerson. Hope Emerson, you may recognise her from other films. She was more associated with comedies, with unusual roles. For instance, she has a wonderful role in the film by William Wellman called Westward the Women, a western, an unusual sort of western with a largely all-female cast, made in about 1953. But this is absolutely serious as a heart attack role for Hope Emerson in this film. What, of course, we begin to understand, and what Marty already has figured out, is that the tortured old woman that we've heard about, from whom the jewels have been taken, the torturer was Rose. Now, this has led some commentators on the film, particularly the guys I mentioned before, the French guys, Borde and Chaumeton, who wrote the book on film noir in the 50s. This leads them to a kind of a surrealistic reverie about this character, Rose, who they greatly admire. They call her, a wonderful phallic woman. Well, phallic woman isn't such a bad description of this character. And here's where we get, once again, the investment, the particular interest during this movie, at least, by Siodmak in sadism and perversity. And here's really where that aspect of the film comes out, is in this character who is absolutely not in the Hollywood norm of female glamour. Now, in this sense, Rose is, of course, part of this series of female characters in the film, which also includes Miss Pruitt. And so we see here that Marty Rome, he's an equal opportunity seducer, in the sense of, it's not only young and beautiful women that he's ever been involved with or wants to be involved with. He realises the importance of playing the field, of getting, in a sense, every type of woman, of every age, of every build, into his charms, subject to his charms. However, of course, Rose is a rather formidable target for his charm, as we're going to discover. We're going to discover it in this scene just coming up, where, of course, Marty just wants to sleep. As the guy who's always on the run, he's not getting much rest these days. And he really needs a night's sleep. And when he drives this hard bargain with Rose, it's like, I need the money to get out of the country, I need a passport, and I need a night's sleep. Now, look at this great scene, probably the most memorable and celebrated scene of the film. Rose, who is, after all, a masseur by trade, starts giving Marty a relaxing little massage there. But as she's talking, we start to become aware, and Marty starts to become aware, slowly, of an element of menace here. Okay, so here's another power game. It's a variation on the many power games that are physical and intimate in the film. A little bit like the scene of Niles at the bedhead, but even more so. Like, look at this, a fantastic moment where Rose tightens the grip, and we know that, you know, she could kill him in this movement if she so chooses. Now, Marty manages to avoid this fate. He manages to kind of smooth his way out of this situation, but he's worried. And who wouldn't be? And look at this shot that expresses the respective power positions of Rose and Marty at this moment. And this great detail of her walking off into the background of the frame. I mentioned earlier that many commentators of the film have discussed the theme of obsession with Candela, that he seems obsessed above and beyond the call of duty as a cop with this case. And his personal investment, which seems extreme, is of course indicated in the way he ingratiates himself with the Rome family. This scene is particularly dedicated to the idea of obsession, of Candela's obsession. Like Marty, he's not sleeping. Well, Marty is finally, presumably, getting some sleep. But Candela is the guy who's now not sleeping.
I beg your pardon?
He's driven. His more down-to-earth partner, the character of Jim, is of course saying, you know, basically it's just a job, take a rest, you know, come back to it tomorrow. What we've just seen then was a very clever and ironic transition, because Candela said, you know, Rome is not sleeping. Well, in fact, Rome did manage to get a good night's sleep because, at least for the time being, as he feels his neck there and remembers the menace meted out by Rose, but nonetheless he's managed to get Rose to help him. And not only that, but he's getting a rather good breakfast spread here out of his time with her. And so Rose is in the line of women that Marty manages to manipulate, but she's also a thing apart from that series. She is someone who can't be completely manipulated, and someone who has her own moves, right, her own power moves under her belt. At this point of the film, we enter in this alternating between scenes of Rome and scenes of Candela. Here we have the whole reconstruction of past events that Candela himself, of course, was not present at and is trying to investigate. And one of these, of course, relates to the character of Orvie. And this scene here answers the scene much earlier where we established Orvie's revenge plan. Now, Orvie, of course, is not coming out of this scene too well himself. I mean, he's going to suffer the consequences of helping Rome. But this guy, this boss, has finally got his comeuppance, and Orvie, in that wonderful gesture, has his pleasure in the misfortune of his superior. Here is another one of these location shots that's characteristic of the film as being part of this kind of more supposedly realistic subgenre of the crime film. And we're moving now towards a very important action scene of the movie. But first, back to the sociology, because here's the scene where they've gathered all of the illegal migrant doctors of this part of New York. This is quite a poignant scene, actually, because, these guys, they don't want to be tainted by association with crime. They don't want to lose what tenuous hold on their profession that they have in America. In Candela's behaviour in these scenes, there is a very evident lack of compassion. Basically he's going to put away a bunch of people in jail for being accomplices to Rome. And in a very real sense, Candela, doesn't care, He's so single-minded, he's so dogged in his pursuit of his nemesis, Marty Rome, that really he doesn't care who he puts away at this point. So once again we have a scene where, in the Siodmak style in this movie, we get little glimpses of another character and his point of view, and of course particularly Dr. Veroff here, who is about to be discovered with the money that he extracted from Shelley Winters. And beautiful little reframing there in the way that Siodmak loves to do it. One character leans into another. This is always a very strong moment in Siodmak's cinema, when one character leans into another or leans down to another, because it's the intensifying moment often of a power game or of domination. So of course Dr. Veroff can't get out of this one. He's going to go to jail. It's very economically done, this scene, right? Just that single panning camera movement, and Dr. Veroff's kind of sad walk across the room is enough to tell you that he's about to be put away in jail, and he makes this appeal to Candela to sort of to help out his wife, basically. So once again we have an insistence on this social detail of melting pot America, this America that has, of course, its Italian community, its Russian community, it's all of these different hyphenated types of Americans kind of gathering in the melting pot of New York. It's one of the things that sort of became important to a number of Hollywood films in this period, such as the films of Elia Kazan and others. Samuel Fuller often used this kind of detail of the different ethnic groups within America and the problems of assimilation. Because a lot of these sort of social conscience pictures or social issue pictures were precisely about assimilation, like how do we assimilate delinquent youth? How do we bring them back to the path of doing good and morality and law? How do we assimilate migrants into the community rather than have them go off and form their own criminal underworlds and so on? So these films are all about integration and assimilation. A critic such as Michael Walker, that I mentioned before, he sees this film as in a way torn between its sort of social issue agenda and these darker undercurrents, these themes of obsession and of perversity and of sadism and so on that are coming out. I don't see the film so torn in that way, so contradictory in that way. I think Siodmak, in whatever way that he thought of these things, was very aware that there were these different tones and levels and themes in his movie, and I think his aim was always to give them a good shape, to sort of balance out these different elements that he was working with. I feel he does it extremely well in this film. Okay, so now Marty has a plan here, right? He wants to just hand Rose over, as it were, without her knowing it, of course, to the cops.
Ticket and the money.
He's alerted Candela that she'll be there, that she'll be picking up the jewels, the key in the locker. But of course, Rose is not taking this at all. she's one tough cookie, and she refuses to be played, to be manipulated this far by Marty. So, of course, her idea is simple. She wants him to enter the train station with her. This is going to cause some intriguing complications and intriguing crisscrosses of characters in the marvellous scene that we're about to see. Once again, here we have the street detail, the real locations. Now we get into a more stylised vision. Now here's a train sequence which has nothing to do with trains, unlike later films like Brian De Palma movies, Carlito's Way and Dressed to Kill and so on. There's a moment coming up in this scene that I want you to pay particular attention to. It's when Candela enters the scene. But for the moment, we have this tense play out with Rose going to fetch the jewels to open the locker. Now, this sequence, like many sequences in the film, is a kind of an answer or a mirror to an earlier scene. Of course, we had the scene earlier where the cops were trying to eavesdrop on Tony, the little brother. Here, they're successfully sort of shadowing Rose, and of course they grab her more or less effectively. Although, as you'll see, Rose fights back, and her immediate response is, I'm going to kill that double-crosser. Now, here's the moment to look for. So, Candela arrives, he pauses for a moment on the stairs, and I want you to look at this posture that he gets into. She shoots the gun just as Candela is rising in the air, and over 2 shots we see him fall, having been hit by the bullet. Now, Michael Walker, who I've referred to, refers to this as one of the Christian iconographical moments in the film. It's the moment of Candela as an avenging angel, sort of soaring above the figure of Marty. Marty, of course, just then, in a shot like Siodmak's Phantom Lady, sort of escapes in the crowd of serial, anonymous, ordinary people. Now we have another one of these doubling or rhyming moments in the film, or events actually, because with another series of ellipses, we have Candela in the hospital. He's been wounded. So now he is, if not exactly a dying man, at least a bleeding man. So he's the double of Marty now, and even more so, of course, he's in a hospital in the way that Marty was. And even more so, he has escaped from this hospital in the way that Marty also escaped from the prison hospital earlier in the film. Now, a lot of that, of course, is unseen. We didn't see that action. As we get near the end of the film, the ellipses, these sort of leaps, these jumps between scenes become quite great and become driving. They really drive the end of the film. There's a bit of funny byplay in this scene with the sidekick cop who talks about, well, if he hadn't been wounded, he would have taken the chance to rest. But of course, just like for Marty, there's now no rest whatsoever for Candela. Now, look at this, 80 minutes into the film and another new character. It's Pruitt's mother, once again, a very short but very vivid vignette of a character who, is putting the guilt trip on her daughter and saying, well, if you don't want me here, I can go to an old person's home. She's also nursing a cat, which is giving her quite a gouge there in her hand. Now, here's an unexpected moment, which is Candela's arrival at the Pruitt house. The mother, of course, gives in Nurse Pruitt immediately, as we can see in that look she gives her mother. And this is a scene where you really do get the measure of a kind of derangement in Candela's character. Of course, he's wounded, he's desperate, but the way his incantatory kind of way that he's saying names and church and Tina, and he's completely a driven being at this time. And he figures out, of course, that there is going to be a church meeting, a church rendezvous between Marty and Tina, the Deborah Paget character, who finally returns to the film after being invisible for all this time. Now, we have an important bit of business here between Marty and his brother, Tony. This is an important moment in what we could call the moral calculus of the film, the way on the social issue plane it tries to sort out the various good and bad morality of characters, because basically here Marty is giving his brother a pretty rotten job to do, which is basically to steal money from the family, to steal money from the mother. And you'll notice that gesture there, that Marty almost hits his brother. So it's like Marty's going beyond all possible humanity, and it's also, once again, like Leg's diamond, the charm is running out, right? And now we're only seeing the brutal side. Now, this scene, this exchange between Marty and Tina is remarkable in many ways, and I ask you particularly to notice the intensity and the closeness of the framing and what Siodmak does with the tension of this framing during the scene. Now, psychologically, what's happening here is that Tina, of course, like the mother in an earlier scene, is starting to doubt the motivations and the behaviour of her boyfriend. He, of course, does a final charm offensive, trying to talk her around, trying to keep her on side. But we can see that this is getting a more and more desperate campaign. In this scene, as in her very first scene in the movie, Deborah Paget as Tina has this, almost saintly, innocent, Madonna-like quality, which is very much emphasised in her clothing and in the lighting that's used on her. Now, take a careful note about the way that Siodmak frames her. We see her from the front in her illuminated close-up, and we see her from the back. Her eventual exit from this scene is very striking, and something is going to happen before that, which is going to be Candela's entrance, and he will be another surprise entrance in the scene right there, that whip pan which introduces him. So this scene is in many ways a highly unreal sequence in the hyper stylised way in which Siodmak is using his framing. In his account of the film, Michael Walker pays particular attention to this moment, and basically Walker's argument is that if this film, Cry of the City, was more of a film noir than a social issue film, if it was darker, if it was more perverse, it would explore its subtext more fully. And for Michael Walker, basically, there are hints that Candela is a kind of an unrequited lover, like someone who has desire for Marty. Now, we don't need to take that as an explicit theme or a surface theme in the film, but it's certainly strange, the intensity of Candela's obsession here, and the way that he talks about Marty having discarded all these people in his life. It really is like he's taking it very personally in this part of the film. Anyway, whatever the justification for the intensity of Candela here, his words on Tina have a strong effect. So what I want you to look for now is Tina's reaction, which is purely the physical gesture, the action of getting up and leaving. But because we're at such a high pitch of the movie in terms of its emotional intensity and the fact that all of the themes of the film are wrapping up now, of course, we don't need any realistic detail of where does she go and what does she do after she leaves the church. Quite simply, and we're looking at her from the back now, she exits the frame. And that's it. That's all we see of her. She's gone from the movie now. Her function is completely used up in this film. And now we get to what the film is really interested in, which is this face-off between Candela and Marty. So here's another scene in which Candela is making a calculated guess that Marty will not attack him inside a church. This proves to be true. Of course, in this scene, Candela is bluffing. Candela's bluffing that he has a gun that he doesn't have. And so think about it. This is the confrontation of two guys, both of whom are wounded seriously. Candela's had, fairly serious surgery, and Marty needs that surgery, or perhaps he's beyond the point where it's going to help him. And we have this very, very tense face-off. And finally, they're going to make a move out of the church. And it's just superb how economical and how poetic, in a sense, Siodmak renders what in some other film would be, perfectly ordinary movements. Now, there's an emphasis there on the wound of Candela, which reminds us a little bit of when Rose sort of whacked Marty and sort of whacked him, in his chest, in his shoulder. It's like a mark of male vulnerability in the film. Now they're outside of the church, and in a sense, all bets are off. Like they've moved from the church to the street. It's almost like these mythological settings in the film. Now, Marty's noticed the bleeding, and he realises that, of course, Candela is vulnerable. He's literally vulnerable. He can be whacked on his wound, and as you'll quickly see, he's completely incapacitated by this. Once again, there's something unreal in that gesture and the force of its effect. But here we truly are in a kind of almost mythic conclusion of the film. This is a very film noir moment, right? The lights surprise Marty, and so he limps off down the street, and we really are in a kind of film noir conclusion here, where the two guys sort of one drawing away from the other. And then finally, we've heard that Candela, really has never had to kill anyone in his life. But this is the moment where he will kill, as it were, his brother, his double, his mirror. So that's why I call it a kind of a mythological ending. And look at this fantastic last moment of Marty Rome, where there's this like final surge of energy, final surge of murderous energy, because it expresses itself like in Charles Laughton's Night of the Hunter with a kind of erect flick of his knife. Candela's already passed out, and now Marty dies. So totally great finale to a film, and we still have one or two details left to go, because the film has to draw to a conclusion its moral calculus, its moral balance sheet, as I've called it. And so, of course, the emphasis immediately is displaced. It sort of leaps from, and literally in this shot, right, we leave Marty behind, and we concentrate on the brother, Tony. And of course this question, which is the question of all of the social issue films, is, will the young person become a delinquent, become a criminal like the bad brother, or will he fall under a better influence, a more moral and lawful influence? And so we get this beautiful gauntlet, right? We get this walk, this slow walk of Tony from the one male figure to the other, from his real brother to, in a sense, his symbolic brother, or even his symbolic father in this moment of the film. And it's fascinating to see the way that Siodmak treats this scene, because he doesn't overplay the, as it were, the moral sentimentality, the redemptiveness of this moment. Candela, of course, still pretty wounded here, And they get into the police car, of course, sign of the law, sign of order. But then the breakdown of Tony here is something we don't hear. Instead, the film once again returns to the music of Alfred Newman, which takes over the soundtrack, and the film ends on exactly that note. A note of precarious balance and harmony.